Hey guys, it's Katie here with Life the Mundane and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you guys my 15 favorite kid podcasts. Guys, I don't know if you guys have gotten into podcasts with your kids, but they are ideal for road trips in the car, for snowy days when you're stuck inside. No matter the season, we love to use podcasts for education, for encouragement, and for discovery. So today I'm going to be sharing with you guys 15 of our family's favorites and share a little bit about each one. So let's get started. All right, so the first category of podcasts are story-based podcasts. Now, these are not ones that are based on stories. These are more audio drama type feels. So these are some of my kids' favorite ones for sure. And the first one would be Paws Tales. I've talked about this one before. It's set in a forest with a bunch of animals. They go through stories that are very similar to an Adventures in Odyssey type feel, if you guys are familiar with that, but definitely geared a little bit younger. Now, my kids are 11, 10, 9, 8, 3, and 2 years old, so they all love them, even though the older ones, it may not be technically geared towards their age. I think you'll still find a lot of enjoyment in these. But Paws Tales is a great one, biblically based, good foundation, and great for your family. The second one is a newer one that has come out, but it is based on the children's book series, Hank the Cowdog. I did not grow up reading the Hank the Cowdog books, but my husband did, and he loves them, and he is so excited about this new podcast. It is actually done, produced, written, and the voice of Hank is done by Matthew McConaughey. Who would have thought? But it is a really fun children's story for your kids. It follows Hank the Cowdog as he goes through his adventures on the farm. Each story builds on its own. That is a newer podcast, so there is only about 6 or so episodes, but a new one comes out each week. So definitely something worth checking out with your kids. The third one in this category is Miss Rory's Story Emporium. This, unfortunately, is a podcast that has been discontinued, but she did a series of stories. I think there's 3 or 4 series of stories or seasons of podcasts, if you want to look at it that way. But my kids have absolutely loved listening to them. She has a Christmas one. She has one all about a treasure hunt and these kinds of things. And each episode is a section of the story, and she's telling this big story. My kids get super involved in it. We really wish she was still making awesome podcasts because they were really well done. Audio and voices and storylines and everything. Unfortunately, she is not, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't still go and check out those stories because my kids love to listen to those over and over again. Category is our biblical-based, theology-based podcasts. So the first one up is the Lunch Break Hymn Sing. This was designed by a homeschool family or Reformed homeschool family to be listened to during lunch time and to be able to explore different hymns and to hear a little bit about the history of the hymn, the composer, or maybe the story behind the hymn, all while playing the hymn in the background as you're listening. Short and sweet and to the point, a great addition to your lunchtime or any time of day. The second one is Reformed KidCast. This one is by far my favorite of all of this category. Reformed KidCast, again, is one that is no longer being produced. However, what it is it's a father and his 2 kids as they go through each and every question in the children's catechism. They discuss the question and the answer, and they talk through what those mean. The kids ask questions that every single child is going to ask. What do you mean the Trinity? How can God be 3 persons in one? And as they wrestle through these things on this podcast, his dad does a phenomenal job of explaining and breaking it down into kid bite-sized pieces without distorting the theology behind it. Even though it is a discontinued podcast, they actually went all the way from the beginning to the end of the children's catechism. And so it is definitely an amazing resource. We go through the children's catechism in our homeschooling. In the mornings, we work on 2 new questions a week and we review the other ones each day. And so we'll memorize several and then we'll listen to the Reformed KidCast that covers those questions so that we can dig even deeper and have good discussions with my kids. So Definitely a big favorite. Another one is Simply Stated. It's done by Ligonier Ministries, if you're familiar with them, and it's exactly what it says, Simply Stated. It takes big, deep theological issues, takes one piece of it, and breaks it down into a way that people can understand. This one is not necessarily targeted just towards kids, but it is definitely great for your kids to talk about these big words. What does sanctification mean? Whatever the concepts are, what are the Nicene Creed, things like that. Breaking that down into small bite-sized chunks so that we can understand it. Then another one that goes along with that is Ligonier Ministries' other podcast, 5 Minutes of Church History. This one is 5 minutes digging into a portion of church history. Great podcast. Really excited to dive into this one. This is a newer one we started listening to, and it's so important to have a foundation of church history to understand the mistakes that have been made so that we don't repeat history in a bad way, and understanding how God has been at work all throughout this story. A new podcast that has just come out that we've started listening to. It is foundational, historical, biblical based, but is also story kind of related in the sense that it is more of an audio drama, also done by Ligonier Ministries, is Luther, going through the life and story of Martin Luther, going through the different things that he experienced in his life and the things that he did. So especially on this week as we're celebrating Reformation Day and Reformation Sunday, this would be a great one to dive in and start listening to with your kids. When it comes to the history and science category, there are a few that definitely need honorable mentions. The first one is Real Cool History for Kids. It is written by Christian author Angela Odell. She is the one that actually writes Master Pook's curriculum for math and for their elementary history. She does such a great job in these podcasts of taking the opportunity to look into either someone's life or a significant time period in history or an event, and looking at how God used that for good and how God worked in there. She's also really good at emphasizing that our kids are part of history as well, and that God can use them too. And I really love having this biblical base for history. She does such a great job. The only complaint my kids have is that she only does podcasts every other week, I believe, and they wish it was on a weekly basis. She is going into her second season of this, and I would highly recommend you guys start listening. A couple other ones for honorable mention here for history is Homeschool History. Now this one and my next one are both secular based resources. So I'm just say that you need to listen with some listener discernment. They are targeted towards kids. They are funny. They are educational, but you just need to use some discernment with your kids on this. These are ones that I highly recommend listening to in the car or alongside your kids versus just putting them on and walking out of the room. But Homeschool History walks through in a very humorous way, walks through different significant people in history and tells you the facts that are, more commonly shared, along with fun, quirky facts throughout history. But my kids have loved it, and honestly, my husband and I enjoy listening to it too. It definitely keeps your attention, and they have fun quizzes at the end of the podcast to make sure your kids were listening and to see what they retained from the information. The next one that goes along kind of with those same disclaimers is Greeking Out. Greeking like Greek mythology, Greeking Out. And it is also going through, but more specifically in Greek mythology. My kids love to learn about Greek mythology. I do too. My husband does too. We find it super interesting and fun and fascinating to learn about all the different things from that time period. And this is a podcast that is definitely fun and lighthearted for that very purpose. For science, we like to listen to Earth Rangers, which is a podcast all about, think Wildcrats in podcast, only set in Canada. So there are a few facts that are very specific to Canada. When she talks about measurements, it's usually in the metric system. And so there are a few things like that, but they're just great discussion topics. She goes through and they'll explore a different particular animal or a different species of animal. And we'll talk through fun facts. She'll usually talk to an expert on the phone and interview them on some fun things you can learn about that animal. It is secular based, which overall we've not found a problem. We've skipped episodes that are dinosaur based or things like that but for the most part, you can tell from the title whether it's going to be something you want to listen to or not. It is conservation, has a conservation mindset, and taking care of our planet, which as Christians, I do believe is important. There are certain episodes where I feel like maybe they take that a little bit far to the extreme, but overall, we really, really enjoy the episode or those episodes, but those are ones we listen to together as a family versus having the kids listen to separate. But Earth Rangers is definitely a huge favorite, and if your kids like Wildcrats, it's going to be very, very similar content. Again, even with the secular input there, very similar content. So I think you guys will really, really enjoy that one. So our final category is looking at just sort of our miscellaneous favorites. Classics for Kids is a great podcast going through classical music pieces. It is short, it is fast, it is really fast paced, like really. So you may want to listen to them a couple of times, but again, they'll go through either the composer or particular piece of music or particular style or instrument and dig deeper into the history of that, telling the stories behind it while playing musical pieces in the background. This is a fantastic one that even my toddlers enjoy, but also my older school-age kids enjoy hearing all the history and the facts. The second one is Julie's Stories, which is actually a new podcast created by Julie Andrews, and she reads with her daughter, which is really fun, and they read different children's storybooks. Now, the reason this didn't end up in the story category is because, like I said before, the story podcasts tend to be more audio drama, voices filled in, you hear the background, whereas this is them actually just reading the stories. Now they read it with their own voices, but you can tell it's the same person throughout. This has been a really sweet one though. We've really enjoyed it. There's only a few episodes out, but they're coming out with new ones every week, and we've just really enjoyed what we've heard so far. So that one can be a fun one for kids of any age. The third and final podcast, guys, and this has probably been one of my kids' newest favorites. I mean, all of these are our favorites, that's why I'm talking about them, but one of the ones that has been most interesting to my kids most recently is J House Podcast. J House Podcast is actually based off of J House Vlogs, which is a YouTube channel, homeschool family, amazing Christian homeschool family. The dad used to be a lawyer. He's now retired to do YouTube and help his wife with homeschooling and things. They just share their life on YouTube of how it is to be a homeschool family and vlogging throughout the experience. Well, they created a podcast with their kids, and the dad and several of his kids. He has a larger family, so he usually takes 1 to 2 kids at a time, rotates and has them through with him on the podcast, and they get to interview different important people, different influential people, and they get to talk through them. A lot of the people that they interview have their own YouTube channels. What's really fun for us is to listen to those podcasts, to hear from these influential people, to get to hear the kids interviewing and asking questions, as well as the adults, to learn new information, but then to find a new YouTube channel to go check out. So for instance, one of my kids, we listened to the one where they interview a lady who makes art dominoes. So she makes art pieces out of dominoes and does these huge knockdown domino videos and stuff like that. So of course we had to go watch that afterwards. They've interviewed people from Lego talking about what it was like to make the Lego Mario adventures that they've come out recently. They've interviewed somebody from Studio C, so we started watching a lot of Studio C videos. Anyways, we have discovered so many new fun people and YouTube channels just from this podcast, while still learning really important and valuable things. The episode that we were listening to that introduced us to Studio C, or introduced my kids, I was familiar to Studio C, was actually about racial diversity and how can kids in this situation help affect change in our world. So it's not all light and airy topics, but it's done in a very kid-friendly way, family-friendly, and I just love the atmosphere of the whole thing. Okay, so there you have it. That's our 15 favorite podcasts. I would love to hear you guys' suggestions. I would really love to find a Christian science-based kid podcast. I have found a few, but just none of them kind of hit that niche. They're either a little too dry for my kids, or I feel like they're a little too fluffy. And so if you have any science ones, definitely drop them down in the comments. If you guys have any others, I would love to hear it. Be sure to stick around and subscribe, push the little bell notification to be notified when new videos come out, because on Saturday, we're actually going to be sharing with you guys kind of a day in the life of what our homeschool day looks like, what our flow looks like. We've already done a video all about what our morning routine looks like leading up to school. You can check that out here, or you can check out other videos we have right here, but we would love for you guys to come along and see what our homeschool day looks like. So be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you guys Saturday. Bye.